Welcome everybody to the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter annual meeting. We have folks coming in right now, so we'll get started here in just a couple minutes as we see everyone start to join into the webinar. So welcome and thanks for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Just hang tight and we'll get started here in just a minute. Thanks everybody for joining. For those of you who are waiting right now, we are just going to give people a few minutes to get on and we'll get started here in just a minute. So sit tight and get ready for an awesome presentation today. Happy Sunday, everyone. We're still waiting for some folks to hop in and then we will get started here in just a minute, but you've made it to the right place. This is the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter annual meeting. So stay tuned. We'll get started here in just a minute. Hi, Peggy from Cedar Rapids. That's a good example. Anyone else want to throw your name and where you're from in the chat? You can do a little introduction while we're waiting for everyone to get in. I'll put mine in there. I am Jess Zure from Des Moines. And Bree from Cedar Rapids. Welcome, Bree. Okay, I think that we're going to get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. Today is the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter annual meeting. And before we kick this off, we would like to have a few words from our board chair, Mike Clementina. So Mike, would you like to welcome us to this meeting on a wonderful, beautiful Sunday? Oh, Mike, we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thank you, and thank you very much, Jess, for your work and putting this together too. I just want to thank, can't read it. Thank you for everybody for joining us today and for your support of the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter. Your support and participation of our sponsored events means so much. Both online and hopefully someday soon in person. These events help to spread the word about current issues about the environment in our state. I remind you that the chapter produces weekly lunch and learns, and we distribute issue alerts about bills in the Iowa legislature and actions before our administrative agency. And we do all this work with just help of just two full-time staffers, Jess and Pam Mackey-Taylor, and also the great work of our attorney, Wally Taylor, who's just been helping make news and protect Iowa this week. Your support of the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter means a lot and enables us to do this and to spread these words. And I thank you and encourage your continued support of the Sierra Club of Iowa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So welcome everybody to the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter annual meeting. Thank you so much for coming and spending your Sunday afternoon with fellow water and land protectors. It means a lot to be able to celebrate the hard work that we've accomplished over the past year and remind ourselves of the important work yet to come. My name is Jessica Mazur. I'm the not so new anymore Conservation Program Coordinator with the Sierra Club Iowa Chapter. I'll be the moderator for the next hour and a half for our annual meeting. And today we have a short but exciting agenda. After this introduction, you'll get to be the first to watch our new educational video on the 5 principles of soil health, starring our very own Sierra Club member and dairy farmer, Francis Hickey. After that, we'll do our annual meeting fundraiser to make sure that we can continue the important work over the next year. And then we'll hear from our keynote speaker, Alan Guebert. We're really excited to hear from Alan. And after he speaks, we're going to have question and answer. So be prepared to ask some questions. For those of you that are not familiar with Zoom, here's a quick tutorial about how you can ask questions, and utilize the chat. At the bottom of your screen, you have a few options. The two options that we're going to use today are the chat and the Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout Alan's presentation or throughout the meeting, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. And throughout the meeting, if you feel excited or want to point out something that was said, you can use the chat, and you can use that to show excitement or to share information with others. So let's practice using the chat. A few of you already have. If you could all go in there and put in your name, where you're from, and maybe what's your favorite state park in Iowa, or something else about the environment in there. And we'll get to introduce everybody. We have Emma on here, Tom's from Council Bluffs. We have Mike from Iowa City, Marge from Fairfield. We have Freedom from Muscatine, Carol from Fairfield, Pam, Val, oh, it's going too fast to even keep up now. Chris, Val, better. Thank you, everyone. Keep adding your name in there, and we'll get to know each other and start to build a community with other Sierra Club members. So let's get started. So Iowa has a water crisis. From the Missouri River to the Mississippi River, from Minnesota to Missouri, our water is polluted. Private wells are contaminated. Rivers and streams across the state can no longer be used to recreate in. Public drinking water utilities are struggling to keep up with the pollution coming downstream. And let's be clear, it doesn't have to be this way. Agriculture and environment are not enemies. Agriculture and environment can work harmoniously together so that we can feed our communities and enhance, protect our natural resources at the same time. But it all comes down to priorities. Let's think about what the current priorities are in our ag system. We hear regularly fence row to fence row farming, feed the world, get big or get out. And when we examine those statements, it makes it very clear what the current priorities are. It's higher yields, more profits, and constant expansion. These priorities and values are taking Iowa in the wrong direction. Just think about what you see when you're driving around rural Iowa. Most of Iowa's farmland is planted with two crops, corn and soybeans. Come fall, like we see right now, those crops are harvested and the topsoil is exposed to the elements. And then we spread countless amounts of untreated manure on the land that has no roots in the soil. Over the winter, that manure freezes, and come spring, it starts to run off with the spring rains and take some of our precious topsoil with it. After the spring rains, we drive giant equipment through the fields to till and turn the soil, releasing CO2 into the atmosphere, destroying the soil structure, and allowing even more soil to wash away. When we destroy the soil structure, soil cannot hold water as well, so crops are severely impacted by drought and other climate weather events. After we plant the tilled land, plant it with corn and beans and a large dose of pesticides and herbicides, and that cycle repeats itself. This is a downward spiral that we must break. Our farming practices not only hurt our water, our soil, and our climate, but our farming practices are hurting our farmers as well. But like we said, it doesn't have to be this way. Sierra Club Iowa chapter has been working on soil health for many years. We know that if we take care of our soil, if we plant diverse crops, including cover crops, and take fragile land out of production, we can grow food and protect the environment at the same time. This summer, we have been digging into soil health with our weekly lunch and learns. We've done farm visits and articles on what farmers are doing to protect the water and protect their land. And we've been advocating for good farm and environment policies at the State House. One of the things that we've identified is that there's a huge disconnect between everyday Iowans and agriculture. Too many of us, including some of our elected leaders, don't understand the basic principles of soil health. These basic principles of soil health allow us to make good decisions on what farming practices are good for the long term, how we should spend our public money, and what protections we want to enact to keep our water clean and our climate safe. One of the big projects this year regarding soil was creating an educational video on the 5 principles of soil health. These principles are rather simple and can be implemented in many ways. That gives farmers the ability to make it work on their land. So we're excited that you all are going to be the first to see our new video on soil health. So let me get this shared on my screen here.
Jess, you're on mute.
And it froze again.
We've got a technical problem right now. We're trying to get the soil video up. Hang on for a minute. This is the second time we've had a Zoom freeze in the middle. Jess may have to go back out and come back in. We'll give it just a try here. Jess?
I'm frozen. I am frozen.
Can you go ahead and do the next step, the fundraiser piece?
I'm frozen.
Totally frozen? Okay. The Sierra Club is made up of nearly 7,000 member volunteers who work statewide on environmental issues. We have local groups across the state that work on local issues. We lobby, we speak out, we lead, and we work hard to protect, preserve, and enhance the environment. Last year, we worked on a number of issues, including Pattison Sand, which was going to pump water from the Jordan Aquifer and sell it out of state. Over 100 Sierra Club members took action on this. During the legislative session, we had a committee that met weekly to look at all of the bills that were introduced to the legislature, over 1,000 bills. We built a legislative action team of over 80 people who would take action when we asked them to contact the legislators or testify. We testified at meetings, submitted comments, lobbied legislators, and we had a weekly lunch and learn to talk about the issues. The bills included the bottle bill and an attempt to dismantle the bottle bill. We were successful in being able to hold that off. It resulted in hundreds of comments, made the news, and it stopped the bill. We've been working on a moratorium on factory farms. We had a record number of co-sponsors on our moratorium bill this year, 24 people. There's still a lot of work to do. And in fact, you've been seeing some of that in the press lately. Supreme Beef is 11,000 head CAFO at the head of Bloody Run Creek, one of our premier trout streams. We have taken every step possible to stop the approval of the nutrient management plan. Just this week, we filed in court in Clayton County because the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, did not follow its own rules and laws. And Wally Taylor is representing the Sierra Club in that action. 20 days from now, the Department of Natural Resources should file a response, and we'll hear what they have to say about that. We have been working on carbon sequestration pipelines, carbon capture and storage. There are 2 pipeline proposals in Iowa, and both are centered around taking carbon dioxide from industrial plants and storing them underground in North Dakota or in Illinois. One of them would take emissions from ethanol plants and store. The other one hasn't laid out all of its details yet. Carbon capture is pretty complicated, but when you boil it down, the basic premise is that it captures the carbon and stores it underground, or it captures the carbon and uses it for industrial purposes. The 2 pipelines are being offered as false climate solutions, as they will be utilized for enhanced oil recovery or extending the life of coal-fired power plants. Our initial strategy is to identify the landowners and get them organized to object to voluntary easements. And we will be showing some action steps that you can take at the end. And as just mentioned earlier, we've been working on soil health and clean water. There's a lot of work to do to make sure that Iowa protects its soil and water. Sierra Club Iowa chapter is a leading voice in advocacy and education around water quality and soil health. Iowa needs the Sierra Club's work. The voice of nearly 7,000 Sierra Club members in Iowa can make a big impact on the policy that's being passed at the State House, how our public money is spent, and who our elected leaders are, and much, much more. We cannot do this work without you. We respectfully ask that you consider making a donation to the Sierra Club to support our work over the next year. If everybody who signed up for this webinar and gave $100, we would have over $10,000. So we're asking that you donate to the Sierra Club. And I will take a minute to post that on the chat. It is www.sierraclub.org/Iowa/donate. And
Yeah, I think I might be back.
Okay. So
Sorry about that, everybody. We are still learning Zoom. Can't wait till this pandemic is over so we can do this in person and not have technical difficulties. Thank you so much, Pam. And what Pam was saying is so true. We really need Sierra Club, and we need to make sure that we have the capacity to be able to do the important work that we're going to need over the next year, especially on these pipelines, legislative session, elections are coming up. So please dig deep and stretch a little bit. And when you go to that link to donate, which is in the chat, it'll give you an option for tax deductible, non-tax deductible gifts, and then other ways that you can donate as well. So please take time to do that. And then I'm going to go back to our soil video because I think we are ready to watch that. So this is, you're the first to see this. This is Soil Health, the 5 Principles with Francis Tippy. Actually, we're going to stop for we're going to make sure that we get the sound right.
My name's Francis Tickey. I'm a dairy farmer in southeast Iowa. As we've abused our soils over the years, many things have happened that are detrimental. We're going to have a more ecologically sound kind of farming system, a more regenerative farming system here in Iowa. There are 5 major principles for soil health. The first principle of soil health is to keep the soil covered at all times. When it rains, the raindrops will hit the armor, the crop residue, for example, or living plants. A big raindrop comes down, hits that bare soil, it'll actually make that soil splatter and cause erosion. Pretty soon it's all running down with the water down the hill. So having that armor allows the raindrop to hit the soil armor first. That takes the energy away from the raindrop. Let's say in the wintertime or late fall or in the spring, most soils have really nothing living on them. The soil should be protected at all times. It should have a soil armor. Let's look at number 2. To reduce or eliminate physical and chemical disruption of the soil. The chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, and so on, disrupt the soil microbiology. If you have a rotation of alfalfa and corn, the alfalfa can produce enough nitrogen for the corn crop, so you don't need to use any synthetic fertilizer. Physical disruption is tillage. There are many reasons that tillage is detrimental. One is that it loosens the soil and water can wash it away easier. Another is that it breaks up the soil aggregates, and so erosion will be greater. Here on the right, we have soil from a field that has been tilled a lot and has not had cover crops. On the left is soil from a field that has had cover crops and has not been tilled. You can see on the right, when the soil hits the water, it disintegrates, doesn't have a strong soil structure. On the left, you can see the soil has good aggregation and holds together. Now let's look at principle number 3, living roots in the soil at all times. About 2/3 of Iowa's land surface is covered in corn and soybeans every year. They have live roots in the soil for only 5 months of the year. If you don't have living roots, when the rainfall comes down, it will take nutrients with it down the tile drains to the creek, to the Mississippi River, down to the Gulf of Mexico. So what happens in Iowa doesn't stay in Iowa. If you have cover crops on the land between corn and soybeans, those living roots will grab those nutrients and prevent them from leaching. Let's dig into principle number 4, diversity of living plants. When we have one crop on the soil, a monocrop, the microbes that colonize that root are basically all the same throughout the soil. If you put a diversity of crops on that landscape, some are deep-rooted, some are shallow-rooted, some plants will favor certain microbes, other plants will favor other microbes. We get a whole lot of different soil microbes working on these root systems. It's more beneficial for soil health and for building soil quickly. And the 5th principle, it kind of builds on all the others, and that is integrate animals on the landscape. When nature built our soils, there were a lot of animals on the landscape, and that interaction between the animals and the perennial crops was very beneficial for building the soil. When the bison herd would come through, they would eat maybe half of that plant material, and the rest of it they would knock down. And so that was a perfect habitat for soil microbes. When the bison grazed off that tall plant, then the plant was short, so it sloughed some of that root mass off into the ground. And as it grew new tops, it would grow new roots. And so each time the bison herds came through and grazed, they would pulse organic matter into the soil, creating these deep, rich, black soils. Most animals today are not integrated onto the landscape. We have a tremendous number of these concentrated animal feeding operations called CAFOs. You have to harvest their feed at a distance, bring it to the animals, collect their manure and store it, and then take that eventually back to the field. The manure in that system goes into a liquid pit. It is essentially toxic to the soil. A good grazing farm will split the pasture up into small paddocks or cells. And so the cows move about, kind of like the bison moving around the prairie. Only in this case, we control just where they go. So we give them just as much as they can eat, let's say in a half a day. For the next half a day, they go to the next section. It's the nature of cows to move about and graze, and it's the nature of grass to stand in one place. But in conventional agriculture, we made the cows stand in one place, made the grass move to the cows. Many soils around the world are losing their productivity and being eroded severely. And so we need to reverse that process. We need to regenerate our soils, and we need to apply those principles of soil health to make that possible. Healthy soil makes healthy plants, makes healthy food, makes healthy people.
Wasn't that great? That was so much fun to film and work with Francis and really dig into those 5 principles of soil health, because those 5 principles can be implemented in so many different ways. We just have to remember that we have to keep the soil covered. We have to have roots in the ground at all times. We have to have diversity in our planting systems. We have to put animals back on the landscape, and we have to minimize the physical and chemical disturbance of the soil. If we do those things, we can build an agricultural system that works for all of us. It works for people, works for the land, it works for the water, and most importantly, works for our farmers as well. So we'll be doing the full release of that video soon. So glad that you got to preview it. Stay tuned as we launch that in a much bigger way. So I want to move us along. Speaking of soil health, we want to talk with our keynote speaker, Alan Guebert, today. Alan is an award-winning agricultural journalist and expert who was raised on a 720-acre, 100-cow Southern Illinois dairy farm. After graduating from the University of Illinois in 1980, he worked as a writer and senior editor at Professional Farmers of America and Successful Farming magazine. In 1984, he returned to Illinois to establish his freelance writing business and to serve as the contributing editor to Farm Journal magazine. He began his syndicated agricultural column, The Food and Farm File, in 1993, and it now appears weekly in almost 60 newspapers throughout the United States and Canada. So we're so excited to have you here, Alan, and reminding everyone that put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to those. And thank you again for being here. We're really excited to hear from you and to tell us more about how we transform this ag system. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry we have to meet this way at this late date instead of in Waterloo. But at the same time, while we're apart, which is really interesting, we're also almost counterintuitively together, because I'm coming from my intimacy of my office to your home or your office, and that wouldn't be possible without this technology. The other thing is, like was mentioned, I would love to have come to Waterloo, because my wife, Catherine, and I, my first job out of college was in Cedar Falls. We lived on Catherine Street by Satori Hospital, and I worked for Professional Farmers of America. Before a year later, moving on to Successful Farming Magazine, Meredith Corporation down in Des Moines for 4 years. So I have some old, but if not deep roots in Iowa. And seeing Francis Ticky reminded me of one of them. Francis and I go way back, and I admire and respect Francis a great deal, but I also think of him as a great friend because he comes right at you from the heart, but he takes a stop off at his mind and he tells you exactly what is going on. And keep in mind too, Francis is a part of a second effort called the Real Organic Project. That is really important for people who are actually want real organic and not big ag or big organic as they call it. Secondly, my weekly column runs all around Iowa, so that's kind of a cool thing to be finally back in Iowa, even if it is with Zoom. I want to have a conversation with you today more than a talk. And by that, I mean, we can go both ways. And I want to give you some ideas, some facts and figures that are all backed up, either through USDA's data or other people like Francis, who are real solid sources. And I want to give you these ideas as to what's going on in ag today in hopes that you can better influence farm and food policy, because that's where the whole ball game is. It's getting your ideas, your thoughts, your views, your legislation into the hands of people who are going to decide. And for us to do that effectively, we need to really be informed. I hesitate to use the word educated because I don't think I'm not an educator. I wasn't trained as an educator. I think if I give you the information, however, my hope is that you can use that in any manner you wish, hopefully to then change the world if you can. We're going to talk a few things rather quickly. We're going to talk about ethanol and where it's going. Then we're going to talk hopefully about CAFOs, and I'm going to hit that very lightly because I know you do a lot of stuff on CAFOs already. But I want to talk about how they subvert farm and ranch goodwill in a very policy corruptive way. It's like an acid eating way. Third, we talk about how then these farm groups purposely misrepresent who they are, and then how they use this illegally or ill-gotten mass to goodwill to then outsizely influence the policy making. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit more about where the ag policy is really going. And along the way, we're going to talk a lot about climate change. So just to begin, let's talk a little bit about ethanol and where it is. Interestingly, 60% of all corn grown in Iowa goes to ethanol. 60%. It's a massive amount of corn going to ethanol, and it's the backbone of our corn soybean monoculture. So, but ethanol's struggling, and it's struggling for any number of reasons that are inherent in the product, not just in the legislation. For instance, in 2020, gas sales nationwide were 119 billion gallons. 119 billion gallons. Yes, we use 500 million gallons of gasoline or derivatives, carbon derivatives, every day in this country. So, but that 119 billion was 21 billion gallons under the amount of gas sold in 2017. Now, that's a really important fact for a lot of reasons. If you're an ethanol maker, that means you have less gasoline being sold, therefore less ethanol is being sold. Right now, there's a federal mandate that 10% of car gasoline must be blended with ethanol. So what is the agriculture or the big ag response? Well, let's expand the 10% to 15%. But they're running into a hard sell, a really hard wall on that nationally, and it's almost every political party that's doing this. And it's simply because, if you're an oil producer and you're a gasoline refiner, you've given up 10% of your market already to ethanol. I mean, you didn't have any say in it, they took it. Now gasoline sales are down 12%. So your total sales right now are down 22% of what they were perhaps, 15 years ago. Now they're coming for another 5%. The farmers want another 5%. So you're going to lose 27% of the volume of your sales if the farmers are successful in getting the extra 5%. How would you feel if by federal fiat, somebody took 27% or you saw 27% of your market disappear? Well, you'd fight, and they are fighting. And in fact, Joe Biden's hearing them as Donald Trump heard them. Donald Trump and Joe Biden agree on the same policy. No more mandates for ethanol. Now, on top of that, as I noted before, the sales are falling. And of course, some of those falling sales are because of electric vehicles, which are only going to grow. And mileage standards is going to increase from something like 33 miles to the gallon to 55 miles to the gallon. So there's almost a 40% increase in mileage standards, which translates, of course, into a 40% drop in gasoline sales again. So even if if Big Ag got their increased blending requests, it still would be a failing technology. It would still be something I would not, and I would encourage no one to invest in, just from the standpoint of view. It's a market that's now looking for people to sell to, and it's going to find less and less. So that's really where, and it's not carbon neutral. And in an era of carbon inspection, of great worry about carbon, what are you going to do? We're growing a crop that's not carbon neutral. That the farm groups all say they are, but there's a little magic to their math, of course, to make it sound like it's better than it is. But there's no chance that it's carbon neutral. So, and here's another, if you want to bring in the environment into this ethanol conundrum, the problem that they face, as I said, 60% of all corn grown in Iowa goes to ethanol. Now, if you think about that on a national scale, it isn't, of course, it's great, but the total amount of corn that goes to ethanol in a year is 5.6 billion bushels, okay? We're going to grow about 14 billion bushels this year, maybe even 15. So a third of the corn grown nationwide will go into ethanol. But if you look at the irrigated acres of corn that has to be grown with irrigation, in 2017, and these are the last figures available from the U.S. Ag Census, which will be redone in 2022. It's done every 5 years. But in 2017, we grew 11.6 million acres of corn. On average, used 325,000 gallons of water per acre. So do the math, 11.6 million acres times 325,000 gallons of water to grow 2.4 billion bushels of corn. So 42% of all the corn, if you want to look at it this way, 42% of all the corn used to make ethanol was grown with irrigated corn. Does it make sense to use 10,000-year-old water to grow corn to make ethanol to put in cars at this late date? Well, you're going to run into more and more questions like that, and those are good questions. Those are questions that should be that the ethanol makers should be confronted with. I'll tell you a quick sidebar on what it really means to me. A pretty well-known, let's say, academic in Iowa. I won't give you the university because you would guess perhaps or take a shot at who it might be, but had taken a group of students to a large ethanol plant in north central Iowa just recently, within the last 3 weeks. And he was stunned to hear by the general manager of the ethanol company, who pointed to a bin and said, that bin holds something on the order of 1 million bushels of corn, and that they'd use that 7 times that turnover in that bin to make the ethanol in a year's time that they were making. But he pointed to that bin and he said, which might have been a mistake to build that bin, because he didn't think there would be a future in ethanol. And he was positioning his ethanol cooperative to get out of ethanol. Now, if the managers themselves have finally gotten that message, I hope their members, the people who own those cooperatives, get the message soon too. So with that, let's just talk about a little bit of that was mentioned earlier about your carbon capture pipeline in Iowa, the two of them. I'm really familiar with the one that's actually going to, attempt to link the ethanol co-ops and plants to gather their CO2 and move it on to North Dakota. Why does everyone think North Dakota is a great place? And all of a sudden, North Dakota has some of the dirtiest air already. Forget the ethanol thing already, because it's used by big business because it has so much clean air to generate. They build coal generating plants there and then ship the electricity east. So poor North Dakota is always looked to as a kind of a dumping ground, and rural America in general is always viewed as a dumping ground now today for the rest of America, urban America's problems. Now, big ag wants to use this as dumping grounds for CO2. And what really drives me crazy when I look at all of these things, the math is just ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. $4.5 billion on a pipeline that's going to connect, I don't know, 20 out of the 26 or 28 ethanol plants in Iowa that will then ship the CO2, collect it and ship it. And it's called Summit Cardinal Solutions. Doesn't that sound like it should work? Doesn't that sound like it's really nice, a good thing? I mean, we're solving carbon. And Summit, of course, if you're in Iowa, you know who Summit is, right? Bruce Ratstetter. And I did a series of columns. This is way back in 2012. I did at least 2 columns on Bruce Ratstetter, who at that time had this really interesting idea of renting 803,000 acres of Tanzania. Tanzania, yes, in East Africa. That's 1,255 square miles, 1,255 square miles of Tanzania for 99 years. And the rent he was going to pay was $1 an acre. And what was he going to do with all of this land in Tanzania? He was going to grow corn, displacing 160,000 local people in order to make, ethanol. People forget that. And he got into trouble, at least he got into trouble with me, by sending Iowa State University extension agents over to Tanzania to do some of the legwork, to judge the soil qualities and do some of the infrastructure exams, and put the numbers together. So I wrote a column about it. And I remember it very clearly because I called the column Colonialism 101, courtesy of Iowa State University. And after those columns ran, I got a letter from, as you might guess, from Iowa State University. Not from the dean at that point in time, who was Wendy Winterstein, but I did get a letter from Iowa State University's head legal counsel that was very plainly told me that I should stop writing stuff like this, otherwise they would pursue legal remedy. And I remembered that at that point, what an old friend had told me. He said, when they send you a letter that tells you they're going to sue, they never sue. They sue when they don't send you a letter. And so I just disregarded the letter and then wrote a second column on it. And of course, nothing happened. But I will say that this is the only time I've ever gotten a letter from any attorney ever on any column I've ever written. And I've written 1 million words in my column. That says something about Iowa State University right there, about how they treasure, what it is that their big ag partners do. They treasured it then, they treasure it even more now. And so they're going to try to make this thing all sound very, very, very good, very attractive by creating something on the order of less than 300 permanent jobs, even if it works. That means there'll probably be 30, given the math that big ag uses. So, this is a problem that's meant to solve another problem. And the greater problem is ethanol. And that's going away. So even the whole thing is built on a technology that's dying, ethanol. And of course, it has the biggest of the political backers in Iowa to try to make it sound like it's palatable so that you can chew it off. None of it makes sense. And it's about 100% grade A baloney. and there's no chance that it'll ever make money other than for, you know, the big people who want it. It's not unsimilar, of course, as CAFOs. You have 25 million head of hogs in Iowa. Some people think you're going to 30 million head of hogs. That's about 30 million too many, you know, when it comes to CAFOs. You know, there's no reason you can't have hogs in Iowa. We always had hogs in Iowa. We always did. We had them in Illinois. Everybody had hogs on farms, and it worked. It worked fine. Where's a lot of Iowa pork going? What really drives me crazy about CAFOs, however, and you see this all the time in reporting from the Des Moines Register or even the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and they try to do as much as they can, but keep in mind, they're operating on staffs that are now 1 in 10 that they had 10 years ago. So they can't even come close to covering these issues, let alone covering them in a manner of you know, of a deep background. They move the reporters around too much. But what really drives me crazy is that they say farmers, 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 farmers. These are not farmers who own these hogs. These are farmers who do the work. But the real benefactors of it, the people who make the money, are not farmers. You couldn't find them even in the state of Iowa if you looked. The vast majority of them, fewer than 100, in fact, live out of state. And the few that do live in state, and they're massive in size, and they're massive in wealth, and they're massive in influence. That's why they can change the narrative, as they always do in the media, and say this will affect Iowa, the state. It won't. This is affect farmers. It won't. And keep in mind too, please, that we're always being argued that without hogs, you wouldn't have a corn industry in Iowa. Well, that's what they say too about ethanol. And frankly, neither one's going to be around in 20 years. We won't be able to support it environmentally. It'll be unsupportable and therefore unsustainable. And all of these barns that are being built, keep in mind too, have a 20-year life. So they need constant reinvestment if they're going to work. And do you see anybody reinvesting in these old buildings? Or are they just building new ones? And how many new ones are being built at the present? I don't know, but they don't work. They don't work from even an economic standpoint because they have to institutionalize or federalize the waste. In other words, they have to make their waste your problem, which they've very effectively done. And they've gotten a lot of help from Big Ag doing it. The irony there is that, of course, the real Big Ag groups don't benefit from these guys. The big benefactors are individuals, again, that are money managers. The biggest feedlot owner, cattle feedlot owner in America, is a company that is in New York, around the corner from the Trump Tower. So you got to, if you track down the real owners of this, you'll find the real beneficiaries of it, and therefore you'll discover that it's not Iowa in any sense of the word, either agriculturally or environmentally. We know that. So, but what they do then, what's interesting about the CAFOs is, they divide agriculture into groups. They make corn farmers support hog farmers who then are, with a water issue, or better yet, a land rights issue. This is our land. We can do whatever we want. They nationalize those issues. They take them out of your local hands because these are national corporations. They have operations in more than one state. So therefore, they love seeing these issues taken to a federal level where they can really concentrate their influence in Congress. There's only 435 of those people and 100 senators to boot. They don't have to work in every state house. They do, but they'd much rather work in Congress because that place is really an easy place to influence legislation. And what we're seeing there too is more and more change, federal impact on climate change legislation. And rightly so, as finally we have the attention of the US Congress on climate change. Think of what's going on just this year in around the US. 47% of the United States is in drought, some measure of drought right now. 47%. Never happened before in recorded history. 2.8 million acres have already burned in America. That's a record. That's never happened before. The Colorado River at points is gone. There's no Colorado River, and it just disappears. And that wouldn't be a big problem, except for 8% of the United States GDP is along the Colorado River. So it's a big deal. I mean, 8% of the US GDP would be about $1.5 trillion. Those are people and people's lives when you start using up rivers like that. So the talk now, of course, is, and tomorrow's a big vote in Congress on the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that Congress and the US Senate would probably pare down. But right now, the US House Ag Committee has approved $135 billion in new spending as a part of that $3.5 trillion budget or reconciliation bill. And according to the House Ag Chairman, David Scott, you're going to use a lot of it for carbon sequestration. I pause there because I've been unable in hard searches to find any carbon sequestration that works. That literally involves the words agriculture and carbon sequestration in the same sentence. Would anybody want to take a wild guess of how much carbon sequestration credits, carbon credits were sold by farmers last year? How much they were, how much they amounted to in terms of tons and money? According to the House Ag Committee, Chairman David Scott, 100 metric tons of carbon offsets were sold last year, worth $300 million. $300 million. 100 metric tons. That's virtually nothing in the grand scheme of things. $300 million. Now they're talking about putting 40 to 50 billion dollars into the effort that we don't even know that works. And isn't it really that money being used as a permission to buy permission slips to pollute? I mean, it doesn't solve the problem. It just rearranges the problem. So I'm not going to feel really too good about it, even working. In fact, I can quote you chapter and verse of the Iowa State University research that says it doesn't work. Not the current form anyway. And that was done by a group of agronomists who, I want to read you some of this that I wrote in a column last January, quoting research they had done in December 2000, finished in 2019. The 10-year ISU research project that used winter rye as a cover crop showed, quote, the ability of cover crops to stimulate microbes deep in the soil and farm fields that led to significant gains in water quality, but does not necessarily increase the capacity of the soil to store carbon. And the big problem is because carbon is an integral part of any growing plant's lifespan. In fact, while crops do stimulate soil microbes to store carbon, they also digest at least as much carbon as they store. That digestion converts the carbon to carbon dioxide, which is released to the atmosphere, which then wipes out any stored carbon gain. That's not my words. That's the words of noted agronomists at Iowa State University. And it really means, to me anyway, that carbon sequestration isn't in its infancy. It's in its gestation. We don't even know what it's going to be yet, let alone, if you want to research it, fine, let's go about doing that. But let's not be spending $50 billion on sequestering carbon this year or next year and expect it to have any impact. Again, it's solution looking for a problem. And we don't even know that it works. So, and then when it comes to carbon sequestration, of course, the great solution is we're going to turn to clean green fuel like electricity. Well, 81% of all the fuels burned in the world today are the form of liquid carbon. It means only 19% of the fuel burned in the world today is electricity. Now, in order to have an infrastructure that would turn the whole world into electric based, you would need, and this is the math done by Bill Reese at the University of Vancouver, you would need a grid construction rate of 14 times greater than the past half century. Moreover, you'd have to quadruple annual construction of wind turbines every year for the next 15 years and triple the annual construction of solar photovoltaic panels every year for the next 15 years. And then, of course, you create a problem because they have a 15-year lifespan. You got to redo that in the next 15 years. And if you really want to get bummed out about the prospects of electricity, of really covering off everything, this is another quote from Bill Reese's paper. Quote, an entire year production from the world's largest lithium ion battery manufacturing facility, Tesla's $5 billion gigafactory in Nevada, would store only 3 minutes worth of US annual electricity use. So, the solutions don't lie in making more batteries or making more wind turbines. The solutions, of course, lie in not using so much. And can we do that? Well, of course we can do that. We've done it before. How long ago? Well, 50% of all the fossil fuels consumed in the world today have been consumed in just the last 30 years. Let me say that again. I might have messed it up. 50% of all the fossil fuels used in the history of the world, is what I meant to say, in the history of the world, have been used in just the last 30 years, since 1990. And if 90% of all the fossil fuels ever used in the world history have been used since 1940. Does that mean we have to go back to 1940? No, but we could probably go back to 1990. You might have to give up you might have to choose. You might have to give up your toaster or your iPhone. Which one did you give up? I mean, it can be done. It will be done. And the only other way for it to be done, unless we take control of the problem, is that if the problem takes control of us. You say, well, you can't do this with 8 billion people. No, probably can't. But we could do it with 1 billion people, couldn't we? And I don't want to sound bleak or way out, but that is a solution Mother Nature has already programmed and has, in fact, practices each and every year. I wanted to briefly talk a little bit about farm groups and who are really the bigger, and I think the biggest fighters of change that needs to be happen. And they always preach, that they're there for change, but it always reminds me of my church, my fellow churchgoers in Lutheran church. You say the word change and they break out in hives. So, I'll give you a quick story about the biggest of American farm groups, American Farm Bureau Federation, and where they're coming from. Several years ago, I got a phone call from the former president of the American Corn Growers Association. Great guy named Larry Mitchell down in Texas. And the American Corn Growers, 15, 20 years ago, had given me an award called the Voice of Agriculture Award for a column or two that I'd written. And I didn't think anything out. I have it someplace here, in fact, still. But Larry was calling not to chew the fat or anything. He was calling because he was warning me that the American Farm Bureau Federation was going to give me a call and write me a letter, one of the two, that they wanted my award given to me by the American Corn Growers returned to the American Farm Bureau Federation, because the American Farm Bureau Federation said that they were the voice of agriculture. Now imagine that. The biggest farm group in the country has enough time to track down awards given to little old me 25 years ago because they include the phrase voice of agriculture. Well, I never did return it. I probably can't find it, in fact. But I just thought that was quite astonishing that they wanted to bug a little old guy like me. They've never responded to my columns, but they would respond to the fact that they thought I had an award that I didn't merit. You know, I can't tell you a lot about the Iowa Farm Bureau because I haven't been in Iowa, lived in Iowa for a long time. I have lived the last 35 years, however, in Illinois. And I can tell you a lot about the Illinois Farm Bureau as kind of a template as to what Iowa does. I don't know how rich the Iowa Farm Bureau is, but I can tell you how rich the Illinois Farm Bureau is. It's very rich. And in fact, of the top 100 ag co-ops in America, think about that. These are ag cooperatives. In other words, they're member owned. And as a cooperative, by law, federal law, their charter means they can't make a profit. Meaning they have to distribute all their benefits either in retained earnings, stuff they have to say, build a gas station or whatever, or patronage. And most of you know how cooperatives work. Patronage is this big, retained earnings is this big, and taxes are that big, zip. They don't ever pay taxes. The fourth largest ag co-op in America, for example, is FS. You've never heard of FS, perhaps in Iowa. It stands for Farm Service. It's the supply co-op owned by the Illinois Farm Bureau. Anhydrous, gasoline, seeds, tractor parts, electric motors, you name it, you can buy it at FS. And the elevators, the grain merchandising is through FS too. And just how big is it? It's called Grow Market officially. $7 billion. And that's just one of the businesses the Illinois Farm Bureau owns. They own Country Financial. Country Financial, of course, is an insurance company. It's in banking, investments, and insurance in 19 states. So it's a national from the East Coast to the West Coast, and includes Alaska, those 19 states. So they're not a $7 billion a year company. They're not a $10 billion a year company. They could be a $40 billion a year company, and they are a co-op. You know, they're member owned, and they are highly influential in Illinois politics, highly influential. And whatever they say in Springfield happens, just like whatever the Iowa Farm Bureau seems to be able to say in Des Moines, it happens. They have an oversized representation. Just Friday, the Illinois Farm Bureau sent out a note of quoting its president, who I know pretty well, saying that they're very disappointed in Joe Biden's quick decline to raise the blending levels on ethanol. And they said, we represent 80,000 farmers. We're the voice of 80,000 farmers in Illinois. No, they're not. And there aren't, you know, there's 102 counties in Illinois. If there's 100 farmers per county, I'd be shocked. So that's 10,000 farmers, full-time farmers statewide in Illinois. And I'll bet it's half of that. In fact, I've long maintained that you could take all the active farmers across every state in America, and I'll throw in ranches there too. And all of them, every one of them, wouldn't fill the football stadium at the University of Michigan. We probably have fewer than 50,000 full-time farmers, and we have a lot of landowners, obviously, who take advantage of that, their farming status for taxes, but we don't have that many farmers left. And their outside influence is tremendous. And for instance, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association claims to be speak for 1 million cattlemen nationwide. Well, first of all, there are not 1 million cattlemen. The latest ag census shows about 600,000. So they inflate that number by 40%. And secondly, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association has fewer than 15,000 members. Now think about that. There's only 600,000 cattlemen in the state, and they only have 15,000 members. But what they have as part of the membership are packers. So why would you call yourself the National Cattlemen's Beef Association if you have packers in it? Shouldn't you be the National Packers Association? And that's how they influence federal legislation, everything from mandatory country of origin labeling, to, the big fight's going to be over packer integration, how few packers there are, and how wildly they are now control the packer the pricing formula in cattle. Packers are making nearly $800 a head on cattle. Farmers aren't making anything. So that's how imbalanced that is. So yeah, keep an eye on that, and don't let the farmers get away with the idea. Well, we represent 50,000 people in Iowa. They don't represent one in 10 of that. And the also thing I would recommend, I would ask you to do is, one of the things that really interests me is, say the National Corn Growers has 40,000 members. Well, there's 800,000 corn growers in this country, and they have 40,000 members. They have 5% of the corn growers in their club, and they claim to represent, I don't know, 70% of the acres, corn acres in America. Acres don't vote. Don't let them get away with that nonsense. Acres do not vote. People vote. And right now, only 5% of the corn growers in America voluntarily agree to join your club. So, when they say they represent corn growers, say they don't even represent the corn grower down the road. They don't. They only represent 1 in 20. So I'd like to get the questions here. I have other information that I'd like to include here, but I'll get the questions so we can, I'll cut this short and we can get back to other stuff. Please.
Thank you so much for that. That was great. And it fires me up and reminds us how much work that we have to do, because, it's not right. Some of the facts that you gave us, that's not right. That's not how our access to be. It's not how it used to be, and it doesn't have to be that way. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. We do have quite a few questions. So if you are still thinking of questions, put those in the Q&A now. We're going to start with one from Mike from Iowa City. Isn't the overproduction of corn and beans to make ethanol and biodiesel really used to suppress the price of corn and beans to provide cheap feed for CAFOs?
Well, the overproduction is, I don't know about the ethanol and everything, but the overproduction of corn and soybeans absolutely has influenced the investment in CAFOs. Without cheap corn, and I mean really cheap corn, 20 years ago in the late 1990s, based upon a new farm bill back then called Freedom to Farm, where it took away all the set-asides that might suppress production, and took away farmer-owned reserve, which was a tool to pull grain off the markets by the government in hopes of raising prices on the markets. All of that was eliminated in '96. Corn prices in Iowa fell to 99 cents. That was just 20 years ago. That was less than a generation ago. And what happened then? Well, then all the big CAFOs arose. You look back in the history of CAFOs, there weren't many of them in the late 80s, early 90s. But when corn and soybeans got cheap, they all of a sudden, that fit into their feeding formulas and they blew up. They could get a lot of financing to build a lot of capacity overnight, and they did. And they got a lot of that financing, almost all of that financing, from the Farm Credit System, which is the Federal Land Bank, which was the Federal Land Bank. Now it's Farm Credit System. And they actually went out and sought out loans to finance this because it's so profitable. And it still is. It's massively profitable.
Next question, can you explain how the farmer loses out in the factory farm system?
Well, yeah, you could write several PhDs on that one, couldn't you? That's not an easy question to answer succinctly, but what it does, I will say this in factory farming, it's against everything in nature. It just is the opposite of the way I was farmed. I was raised on a farm. It's the opposite of where anybody my age is interested in anymore. Iowa, you've got you're almost a poster child for what can go wrong in factory farming, with the heavy use of ag chemicals, the heavy use of tiling to move, water off the farm, the heavy use of manure in certain areas, 5 or 6 or 8 counties upriver from Des Moines. Everything that's bad about factory farming is being done in portions and places of Iowa, and it doesn't work. And what it's done, it's real cost. It's the culture of agriculture. The culture that you had a generation or 2 generations ago that you will never get back unless you get back to agriculture, which was the basis of rural community, the rural economies.
Right. And on that note, Larry is asking if you could restate the numbers on full-time farmers in the US.
Well, according to USDA, there's about 2.1 million farmers in the United States, but that mainly is reflective of tax status. Because if you file a Schedule F or Schedule C, you're a farmer. I mean, for years I farmed. I owned 8 acres of a 40 with my brothers-in-law. I owned 8 acres of a 40. I was a farmer because I filed my taxes that way. And I got all kinds of advantages. I had an accountant one time who said, if you're a farmer paying taxes, you don't have a good accountant. So you should get better accountants. And so I believed him. He worked miracles for me. But just drive up and down the road, any road, pick a road in Iowa, pick any road and look for what I would call a farmstead. Look for tractors in front of a barn. Look for trucks by a bin. Look for grain bins. Look for livestock. That's where you're going to find that, and say that's a farm. And drive 10 miles and tell me how many you see like that. I could drive from Dubuque to Cedar Rapids and not see 5. I know there's more than 5, but I don't even see a farm cat anymore when I drive on, around Iowa or Illinois. So the full-time farmers, like my brother, he's a full-time farmer in Southern Illinois. He probably farms. I don't really talk to him about acres because it's kind of a private matter, but he probably farms about 4,500 acres. On the farm that I grew up on, it was big back then, 720 acres. But we had 4 hired men and their families on that farm. So we had a community. And so today I would guess there were fewer than, I would say 10,000 farmers, full-time farmers in Illinois, fewer than 15 or 20,000 full-time farmers in Iowa. And those would be the 2 big states. And there's a lot of what I call 5 o'clock farmers. They farm before 5 a.m. before they go to work, or they farm after 5 p.m. when they come home from work. And given the technology that we have today, the big planting, the big harvesting equipment, the big trucks and everything else, they can do it. They can do a lot of acres after 5 o'clock every night. So I don't think there's just a lot going on.
Thank you. Another question that we have here is, are farmers feeling squeezed right now? Like, what will it take for farmers to start waking up and realizing this isn't working out for them?
Well, you'd have hoped that they would have woken up in the last 2 years, but because they were given the better part of $60 billion in direct farm program payments, unaccounted for, $60 billion. There's never been a hearing on it. There's never been a congressional appropriations for it. It was just money the Trump administration decided to toss out. And then when, ironically, of course, under the new reconciliation bill to be examined tomorrow, the farm groups are all really worried about budget and excessive spending. But that's how farmers can be philosophically hypocritical. Of course, we hate government until we love government, or we love government until we hate it. It's just they can't decide what they want. Ethanol is purely a government program, purely a government. It wouldn't exist without the blending requirement. So farmers are probably feeling squeezed, but they had a good year. I sell a little grain for my in-laws. My brothers-in-law owns some little farm ground. They don't have a clue what goes on the grain markets. So I watch them every day and I sell their grain. And if you did sell beans for the coming year for $15, you weren't doing your job. In corn, you could have sold for almost $6. We sold a lot for $5.80 for the coming year. You had terrific opportunities to make a lot of money selling corn and soybeans early this year. And the prices are still high. They're still really relatively strong. So they're going to make a lot of money this year and next year. After that, yeah, I wouldn't want to be a farmer. Typically, you make money 2 out of 7 years farming, and then you make a lot. And the other 5, Uncle Sap comes along and writes checks.
So the next question is from Margaret Dreyer. You mentioned that factory farming is immensely profitable, but to whom?
To its owners, to its shareholders, to the few people who control the factory farms. I'll give you an idea of how it works. I had a neighbor in Illinois, and he put up a brand new finishing floor for his hogs. He signed a contract to grow hogs. This building was over 400 feet long, about 100 feet wide, and held at any point in time 10,000 hogs. And he got them in there. They were 11 days old and they weighed 11 pounds. And in 3.5 months, they weighed 290 pounds and they were gone. And he got paid about $30 to do that for that hog. Now, he didn't have any feed costs because the feed was delivered to him. He just had building and labor and $30, and he could turn that building over 3 times a year. So $30,000, he got paid, 30,000 hogs a year, got paid $30. That's $900,000. Not a lot, nothing to sneeze at. His building probably cost him $200,000 a year to run. His labor and electricity costs probably another $100,000. So you start sawing it off, he doesn't make a whole lot of money. Those hogs, however, sold, say they're sold for $60 a hundredweight, they're 300 pounds, 180 pounds. And these guys had very little cost, and corn was cheap for 10 years. Probably they made, if they made $30 a head, times this guy's farm, he was raising 70,000 hogs a year. So $30 a head, they're making what? How much profit? Now they had 10 of those operations. So those people were walking away with fortunes, and they left all the manure for my neighbors and me 3 miles away. It was so bad I could not ride my bicycle past that farm certain times of the year. This time, especially of the year, because that's when they wanted to empty the lagoons. So when we talk about agriculture being, livestock being, say, a $100 billion enterprise, very little of it's left on the farm. Think of it another way. How much of that stuff that my friend used in building that barn could be purchased locally? None of it. He grows corn. He can't even use his own corn to feed the hogs. The corn is shipped into him. So it's just a lot of tail chasing, where at the top, the big pigs make the money.
The next question is President Biden and Secretary of Ag Vilsack want to transition to airplane fuel and biofuels. Transition airplanes to biofuels and ethanol. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
I saw that where they think that biofuel can be a $2 billion or 2 billion gallon enterprise, or a 2.8 billion gallon a year enterprise. I will say this about soy diesel, biodiesel. It is a good product in certain environments. Boats use it a lot. I mean, big commercial boats, fishing trawlers and that, because it's clean. And you water cool the engine. You're pumping water from whatever water you're boating across to cool the engine and pumping it back out. There's no petroleum residues in that water like there is now. You know how you see a boat, you can see a trail a mile behind it? That's oil. That's an oil slick. So biodiesel does work in that area. It doesn't work on the farm because it gels. Diesel fuel gels in the winter, and biofuel really gels, meaning it gets to be gunk. And you have to park your tractor in a heated shop. Maybe you see new shops going up. That's probably why it's being done. Or you have to have a heater in the tank. So farmers might use it 4 or 5 months of the year, but I promise you they do not use it in the winter unless they have heaters of some manner. So I don't see it as a big effort. And the other hint is it not being very much of a big success, how hard the government is pushing it. It can't stand on its own, let alone walk.
One question that we have here is, this is going back to the Summit pipeline. And one of the profit motives is that California may be able to accept ethanol as a low carbon fuel if they do the CCS project. Can you explain, can ethanol ever really be net zero? And is it really going to be a low carbon fuel for states like California?
First question is, can it be a low carbon fuel? Perhaps. There might be new technologies coming along. I don't know. I'm not an agronomist or an engineer. I would hold out that possibility. Right now, we're pretty sure, at least by independent analysis, it isn't. The second thing about California, have any of you been to California lately? Have you noticed in Southern California, where incidentally 2/3 of its 40 million people live, that it's Tesla after Tesla after Tesla? I spent some time around the LA area last winter. First time ever. I was stunned by the number of electric vehicles in that area, all the way up through Santa Barbara and San Francisco and in the Central Valley. And it's not because it's just cleaner, and it's not because the Californians seemingly can afford it, because California demands it. I mean, you have a gas burning vehicle. It's costly in California. Gasoline costs a lot if you're going to pollute, and they want you to pay for that pollution. And the second thing is the warm environment of California does allow electric vehicles to work unbelievably well all year long. Far better than in Iowa or Illinois winters, where they lose quite a bit of efficiency and quite a bit of mileage. And you know, everybody says Californians drive a lot. They're in their cars a lot, but they don't drive a lot. They sit in traffic jams 30 to 40% of their time. They might drive 12 miles and take them 2 hours. An EV is perfect for that. It shuts off. And so can ethanol make it big in California? No, that's a false canard. Don't buy it. It just all sounds good. Well, we're going to try to make it. No, that means you haven't even asked. Anybody wants to ask, they'll find out that nobody in California wants ethanol.
So the next question is from Carol Simmons. What will it take to incentivize farmers to make the changes we need for healthy soil and food? And the second part of this, are you familiar with Cory Booker's plan, and is it feasible?
I'll answer the second part first. I'm not familiar with Cory's well enough to really talk about it or even judge it, but I do know its core, and it probably includes, in my view already, good talking points, but it has to include a lot more farmers in it to make it into law. And by that, I mean, there are a lot of practical things that can be done that he's talking about. I just don't know how many people in the Midwest have read it and think it can work. Now, as far as, you know, the first part of the question, you know, farmers will do what consumers want. And if consumers demand better food, they will get better food. If consumers push for organic quality and real organic, like Francis Ticky talking about, they'll grow it. There's always a market for that. Will they soon be mandated to grow that? It's probably an appropriate question. And my belief is that they'll move more to holistic systems very soon when we remove the financial incentive from corn and soybeans. And by that, I mean, we take away ethanol, and you see, I'll give you a good example of what I'm talking about. I just wrote a column that was, I should look these numbers up because I hate being, I know that this is being recorded, so I hate being wrong. But the general gist is, when you look at, for instance, in the late 20s, the U.S. Farm Census, Ag Census found we farmed 1 billion acres. Believe that or not, we farmed 1.1 billion acres in this country. Today, we farm about 900 million. And the bulk of that difference between then and now isn't roads. It's woodlands. We stopped chopping wood. It makes sense. I grew up in a farmhouse that had wood for heat. And my dad stopped that as soon as the natural gas pipeline came within shouting distance. So, but what was really interesting at that same period, we grew about 80 million acres of wheat. I think it's probably closer to 68 million acres of wheat. 80 million acres of oats. Why? Horses, of course. And then we grew 2.9 million acres of soybeans. Now, this is in the late 20s. Today, we grow 90 million acres of soybeans. This year, about 81 million acres. 814,000 acres of oats. We've gone from 80 million to 800,000 acres of oats. And we've gone from 60 million acres of wheat to 30 million acres of wheat. We can do change. We've done change. Change can be dramatic, and it will be again. And here's the number that just blew me away. In the 1930s, we had 411 million acres of pasture. Anybody want to guess how many million acres of pasture we have today? I'm going to shock you. 414 million. We have as much pasture today as we had 100 years ago. And do you know why? Francis is right. It works. Livestock on soil works. And we have all this land. We can't use it for anything else. We would have if we could have, but we can't. And so if I'm going to focus ag policy in the coming decade at all, and that's just short term, with extra money to target carbon sequestration or come up with new ideas, I'm coming up with multi-species use and multi-crop use of pasture ground. For I can have cattle, livestock, hogs, chickens, ducks, turkeys, and I can have enhanced pasture production too. And according to the Iowa State agronomists, store carbon because I'm not going to disturb the soil. It just sounds like a sure win. Why aren't we talking about it? Because I don't think anybody is recognizing. Now that they know, hopefully we'll talk about it a little bit more.
Right.
Well,
Our last question before we wrap it up here is, are there any thoughts on Chinese industrialists buying farmland in the US, South America, Central America to feed their own population, since most of the terrain in China is not conducive food production?
I can't tell you how many years and how many times I've been told that you need to buy farmland because they ain't making it anymore. Well, yes, they are. And we're making it by tens of million acres each and every year in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Brazil, you name it. You might not like it, but they are making it. And it's all to solve the hunger problem. There is no hunger problem. We throw away 40% of our food in this country, 40%. We export another 20%. Now think about that. So 60% of what we grow is not even used here unless it goes out in a dumpster. So we prove it to yourself. Stop at a grocery store and show me an empty shelf. We have plenty of food in this country. The production of food is not a problem, will never be a problem. The problem is going to be poverty. The problem is going to be people paying for the food. There'll always be food. It's just a matter of, there'll always be supply. It's just a matter of whether or not you can afford it. And so whether the industrialists want to buy farmland, go right ahead. Bill Gates wants to buy farmland, go right ahead. He wants to buy hotels, go right ahead. What I want to know is why he's not even buying his own company. It looks to be a better bet. But I guess he's an end of the roader to some extent. I'm just really worried about the future, and I'm going to go to one of my 100 million acre farms if the end of the world comes. They're good for farmland speculation. They drive up price, they drive up values. They're not good for farmers or farming. But before I go, and I want to tell you a really quick story that I think kind of encapsulates where we are when it comes to ag policy and ag politics, and given all the numbers in that. 300 years ago in Great Britain, there was an Anglican minister who found out that his janitor, the guy who cleaned the church, couldn't read. And he called the janitor in and he said, I'm going to have to let you go. I'm going to have to fire you because you can't read. Well, the janitor took the news and went home, and he had put a little money aside, and he invested in a new thing called coffee. And coffee houses were starting to get really big in London at the time. And not too long, he had made enough money, he built a second coffee house, and then a third, and then a fourth. And well, of course, he became a very wealthy man. And his problem was then, what's he going to do with all his money when he got old? So he went to an attorney. And he asked this attorney to help him sort out his estate. Told the attorney the story. The attorney was astonished. He said, what do you think your life, do you ever think what you'd done if you had learned to read? And the rich, now old man said, yes, I know exactly what I would have been, a janitor. So, when I think about people who think they're going to outsmart everybody, or they're going to, get an angle on everything, they think they know something new. They don't. They really don't. I mean, we're an inventive people. We've been around farming for 10,000 years, and there's very little new. Nothing that's going to clean this up any faster than you or me. And I would encourage each and every one of you. I mean, as I said to you, Jess, when we first talked, being a Sierra Club member in Iowa is not for the faint-hearted. You can't be a chicken and do the work you're doing, but you have to do it. And you have to convince 2 or 3 other people. That's all it takes. And they could get 2 or 3 other people more. Get them going, get them in the community, and vote. Vote. It's the only currency that matters in America. Forget all the wealthy person. Bill Gates gets 1 vote. You get 1 vote. You're Bill Gates. So go out and make the change. You can do it. Who the hell else is going to? You have to. So good luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm sure you can hear lots of round of applause if we can hear everyone who's watching. And thank you for leaving with us with those inspiring words, because you're right, it is going to take us to do it. Because one of my favorite quotes is, if not us, who? And if not now, when? And so we, Sierra Club members, we are the ones that have to be the change makers here in Iowa. So thank you so much, Alan. And before we wrap it up, we're going to tell you how to take action right now, because we wouldn't want to leave this meeting without giving folks something to do. So I am going to share my screen again. We'll hope we don't have technical problems again here. We have 4 action steps that we have live right now to make a big impact here in Iowa. That first one is in regards to the Summit Carbon Pipeline. We're having a webinar to dig into an example of a pipeline explosion in Mississippi. And we want to talk about how dangerous these pipelines can be if they're going to try to build one in Iowa. We'll arm ourselves with information so we can hopefully stop the pipeline. Pam's going to put the link to RSVP in the chat. So click that, register. It's Tuesday, so in just 2 days at 7 p.m. The second action step that you can take is also in regards to the Summit Carbon Pipeline. We have put out a blog that kind of outlines things that you can do to stop the pipeline. We've created an online petition. We have a paper petition. There are a bunch of pipeline hearings that are happening all across the state, and we've put a list of those hearings so that you can attend the one near you. And then we've also, the landowners are going to have an immense amount of power to stop this pipeline, but Summit, aka Rastetter, has requested that those landowner names be private. And so we've put information in there on how you can weigh in with the Iowa Utilities Board and request that those names be made public so that landowners can organize. And then the last thing you'll find in the blog is the landowner rights page. Summit wants to use eminent domain, so we've put together some information so landowners can learn about the eminent domain process and hopefully decide not to sign one of those voluntary easements. So please read the blog. Everything I just outlined there is listed in the blog, and Pam's going to put that link in the chat as well. The third action step is redistricting. So you probably heard a lot about this recently. There are the first set of maps that have been drawn up by the Legislative Services Agency that will show the new districts for our congressional districts, for our state house districts. And the Legislative Services Agency is a nonpartisan agency. Those maps meet all of the rules to make sure that they're fair and just and compact and contiguous and all the different rules they have to follow. So we have an action alert, so you can click on the link that Pam's going to put in the chat, and that will send an email to your legislators to let them know that we want them to support the first set of maps. We don't want the legislature to keep voting these down, because after the third set of maps, the Iowa legislature will get to draw them, and we definitely don't want that to happen. So support the first set of maps. And our fourth action is we are teaming up with the League of Women Voters Iowa for a petition to repeal 2 bad voting law bills. So if you remember this last legislative session, SF 413 and SF 568, those are the bad voting laws. And so please sign the petition. We'll be delivering that later on this year with the League of Women Voters Iowa. But that'll help us get those laws repealed so that we can have fair elections with our new districts. So please take action. Ken has all of those links in the chat, and we'll send those out in a follow-up email after this is over. So you'll have those links as well as a recording of this meeting. And before we wrap up, I just want to thank all of our board members for their service. The Iowa chapter officers are Mike Pimentina, Chair, EJ Gallagher, Vice Chair, Margaret Whiting, Secretary, and Sherry Albright, Treasurer. Our executive committee members are Carolyn Raffensperger, EJ Gallagher, Tom Rosberg, Jim Trepka, Mike Trementina, Fred Kirschman, Wally Taylor, Carol Simmons, Cornelia Flora, Charlie Winterwood, Linda Goff, and our group delegates are Mike Carberry, Jane Clark, Margaret Whiting, Carol Simmons, Sherry Albright, Carrie Radloff, and Charlie Winterwood. So thank you for your service, and thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. And again, Alan, thank you so much for joining us and sharing that information. We hope you have a great weekend, and please don't forget to donate so that you can support our work over the next year. Have a great day.
A lot of questions.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Jess. See you around.